Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give folks just a minute or two to keep coming into the room before we jump in and get started, but excited to see already so many folks in this webinar. We'll give it just 1 minute before we jump into things. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy May 13th. This is our Who Gets to Live Here, Fair Housing and the Bay's Future webinar. We have a great panel today, co-hosted by regional housing justice advocates across the Bay Area. I'm Joey Flegel-Mishlove. I am the policy manager at East Bay Housing Organizations. We're active in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And before I say any more by way of introduction, I'm realizing we should get the interpretation up and running. So I am going to take us over to, our interpretation screen, which is here. And I will invite our interpreters to come off mute and give any instructions about how we can access interpretation. I'm seeing Anna is off mute, but I'm not hearing anything. Is that just me, or is... Oh, I see. We have to stop interpretation first and then invite them. Okay.
Can everybody hear me now?
Thanks,
Okay.
Anna.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Yo soy Ana Rueda de Vidales y estoy con Irene Hernández este día y vamos a proporcionarle la interpretación. Si ustedes quieren escuchar en español, cuando termine de explicar, ustedes van a ver al fondo de su pantalla un icono que es el globo mundial. Tienen que darle clic ahí y elegir el canal español. También está la opción de Mute Original Audio y si ustedes quieren escuchar solo al intérprete, tienen que aplicar ese botón y si no, van a escuchar al intérprete a un 80% y al ponente a un 20%. Si ustedes están con nosotros por medio de un teléfono o un iPad, se tienen que ir a los 3 puntitos que están al final, apretan More, van a interpretación, eligen su idioma, pero es bien importante que también le den a la tecla que dice Done. Va a ser un placer. Muchas gracias. I'm ready. You can activate interpretation again.
All right, thanks so much, everybody. Interpretation should be on, and apologies for me. I was trying to unmute myself and ended up clicking around on the slides. So welcome, everybody, to... My computer is giving me some trouble with the slides. So some early challenges, but that's great. We're going to get the glitches out of the way and then have a really great webinar. Welcome again to Who Gets to Live Here. Like I said, this is a webinar that is co-hosted by East Bay Housing Organizations, the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, Housing Santa Cruz County, Silicon Valley at Home, and Generation Housing. This is a joint event for Affordable Housing Month. Affordable Housing Month is celebrated across the Bay Area. There are events all month in all of the different regions represented here today. We really encourage folks to go to affordablehousingmonth.org to see more educational events, more celebrations, groundbreakings, openings of new affordable housing developments, skill building activities and trainings. There's a really great calendar of events that we have this year that we want to invite people to check out. I will name two specifically that we want to highlight. Housing Santa Cruz County has their 6th annual keynote event in Santa Cruz on May 30th. It'll be a great way to cap off the month and really connect with other community members in Santa Cruz for the housing justice work that we're doing there. And on the same day, but in a very different region, so hopefully pulling pretty different audiences or a different part of the region, AFFH is partnering with the Roots Soccer Club in Oakland. And if you buy a ticket through our specific link, which you can find on affordablehousingmonth.org, some of the revenue from that Roots game will go to advancing housing justice through East Bay housing organizations. So both of those are May 30th. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us for this Affordable Housing Month event. Our goal today is to talk a little bit about fair housing, which is, a concept both in law and policy and in values and principles. And we want to talk about how those values and principles get translated into real life, homes, policies, and concrete solutions, and the successes and challenges we've found across the different parts of our region in making that jump from our values to real life concrete changes in our communities. And the last thing I want to say by way of introduction before we really jump into things is that housing justice, land justice starts with acknowledging the land that we're on and where it comes from. So I'll read the language from this slide. We acknowledge that we are located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the indigenous people and tribes of the San Francisco Bay Area who are still living here and are part of our communities today. We honor the land and the ancestors while also acknowledging that colonization is not an action or process relegated solely to the past. Gentrification, a lack of sufficient affordable housing, and increasing homelessness are all current day impacts on Native families and individuals' ability to remain and prosper in the Bay Area. We are committed to advocating for a Bay Area where everyone has a place to call home. We invite you to learn more and engage with local Indigenous communities. And the map on the right shows, we are calling in from all different parts of the Bay Area with distinct histories, so I can't all be necessarily collapsed into one statement, but encourage everybody to get to know your own region and your home, and both the history of the land you're on, as well as the present conditions and impacts. So with that, we're going to jump into things. Our agenda for today is we are going to have a little bit of an intro on some history and context setting around fair housing, what affirmatively furthering fair housing means, and the landscape of racial and housing justice. And then after that, we'll do a bit of a panel where each of us will share some case studies from our specific regions about campaigns and policies we've worked on to advance fair housing. And at the very end of all of that, we will have some time for Q&A. Please feel free to put Q&A throughout into the Q&A through your chat at any point, and we will be sure to answer it at the end of the webinar. So thanks so much. And with all of that said, I will pass it over to Allison, who's going to get us started. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Joey. And with that, we'll dive right in. So it's no secret that we have a housing affordability crisis here in the Bay Area, across the state and increasingly at the national level as well. So that crisis is driven by our housing shortage, and that impacts thousands of families in Santa Clara County where SB at Home works, and hundreds of thousands of households throughout the Bay Area. You can see toward the left of this chart that renters with extremely low incomes are the most burdened by housing costs. 74% in Santa Clara County pay more than half their income every month for rent. Cost burden makes it harder for low-income families to keep up with rent and utility costs, and a growing number are living one misstep or emergency away from eviction or homelessness. This has huge consequences. A recent study from Princeton and the US Census Bureau finds that people who are severely cost burdened are at a significantly higher risk of death over the next 20 years compared to their counterparts who are not cost burdened. But we know these risks don't fall evenly on all of us. Next slide. Thank you. Much of the reason for our housing shortage is rooted in government policies designed to keep Black, Latino, and Asian residents out. Beginning in the 1930s, the federal government used color-coded maps known as redlining maps to rank the loan-worthiness of neighborhoods in more than 200 cities across the U.S., in large part on the basis of race. Neighborhoods with any residents of color were considered too risky for loans and were marked in red and excluded from homeownership and lending programs. As a result, residents of color were not able to get home loans, even as the suburban landscape rapidly expanded, and they were funneled into neighborhoods that then declined from deliberate disinvestment. Long after the federal government stopped using these maps, private lenders continued to use them with devastating impact. The federal government also continued to use the same language to shape who was served by government loan and insurance programs. Next slide. The decades leading up to the Fair Housing Act were marked by widespread housing discrimination, reinforced by both government policy and private practices that were permitted by the government. Redlining, racially restrictive covenants, exclusionary zoning, and discriminatory lending systematically segregated Black families and other communities of color from white neighborhoods and from wealth-building opportunities. Federal housing programs often subsidized white suburban homeownership while excluding Black Americans, while urban renewal and highway construction displaced communities of color and deepened segregation. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, activists and organizations like the NAACP pushed for federal action on housing discrimination. But it wasn't until after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 that Congress finally passed the Fair Housing Act as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, banning discrimination in housing sales, rentals, and financing. The law also required jurisdictions receiving federal housing funds to affirmatively further fair housing, also known by an acronym of AFFH, by taking proactive steps to address segregation and inequity. But because the law lacked clear implementation standards, enforcement largely focused on preventing overt discrimination rather than dismantling the systems that sustain segregation. Next slide. Thank you. Policies like redlining, racial steering, and racial covenants, which prevented homeowners from selling to purchasers of color, were finally outlawed in California in 1960, but they still persist in practice, as you can see in these headlines that are all recent, with lenders often charging higher interest rates or refusing home loans to Black and Latino buyers, or appraising their homes at values far below comparable homes owned by white homeowners. This has made it harder for people of color to buy homes. These homes increase less in value, and the homeownership rate among most communities of color is actually continuing to go down significantly today. Even as people of color face more barriers to homeownership, ongoing illegal discrimination also makes it harder to rent. Property managers are less likely to respond to prospective Black and Hispanic tenants when they inquire about open listings. And illegal discrimination against renters with housing vouchers is common. And the racial wealth gap that's created by systemic discrimination means it's no coincidence that 65% of all voucher holders are people of color. Next slide, please. So despite our racial and ethnic diversity here in the Bay Area, mapping our population by race shows strikingly that clear patterns of racial segregation still exist. Next map, or next slide, please. Even more troubling, because of historical and ongoing systematic disinvestment, those patterns of racial segregation also reflect patterns of resource scarcity, shown in the lighter colors on the map on the right, and resource hoarding, the darker colors in the map on the right, that are present in our communities today. Next slide. So the Fair Housing Act aimed to create integrated communities with fair access to opportunity, but enforcement focused on preventing overt discrimination instead of dismantling the systems that sustain it. As a result, more than 50 years later, these historic patterns of segregation and inequity remain deeply embedded in California and across the country. As explicitly racist policies were outlawed, race-neutral tools like exclusionary single-family zoning often replaced them, limiting access to affordable housing and high-opportunity neighborhoods. Government policies continue to subsidize predominantly white, high-resource suburbs, while many Black and Brown communities experience disinvestment, environmental harms, underfunded schools, and limited economic opportunity. These planning and housing systems still shape access to wealth, stability, health, and opportunity today. Next slide, please. In 2015, the Obama administration adopted new AFFH rules requiring local governments to identify barriers to integration and take meaningful steps to address segregation, housing inequities, and unequal access to opportunity. The rules marked a major shift in the government's recognition of housing discrimination as a structural problem tied to government policy and planning decisions. The 2015 AFFH rules, though, were never fully implemented before being rescinded by the first Trump administration. In response, California passed Assembly Bill 686, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, to preserve AFFH requirements at the state level, despite shifts in federal policy. Next slide. So AB 686 defines affirmatively furthering fair housing as taking meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination that overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity based on protected characteristics. So every government agency in the state is obligated to incorporate AFFH in all actions to do with housing and community development, not as a checklist, but as a lens that really informs the way we're looking at all of these activities. So now I'm going to pass it to Jeremy to share more about the tools cities have to implement AFFH. And then we'll hear some case studies on how our local jurisdictions are putting AFFH. Jeremy?
I think you're passing it to Jen, Allison.
I'm so sorry. Jen, thank you.
I'll catch it. Thanks, Allison. Jen Close from Generation Housing up here in the North Bay. AFFH, or fair housing, is trying to undo the patterns of segregation, exclusion, displacement, and unequal access opportunity, and the outcomes from that that Allison just discussed. And I want to focus on one of the most powerful tools we have to do something about that, and that is deed restricted affordable housing. And I think we could go to the next slide now, Joey. Thank you. Because I first want to ground us in people. We get super wonky and deep in the policy talk when we talk about housing, but really what we're talking about is people, and the people that are part of our community and our families and our friends, the people that we called essential workers during the pandemic, people that we rely on every day and that we need to power our cities and to add to the richness and cultural diversity of our cities. And folks have sometimes some wrong-headed ideas about who lives in capital A affordable housing. They think it's all folks who are exiting out of homelessness or maybe living on public assistance. And that's true in part, but it's also just a large swath of our workforce who simply can't afford the rents that are here available in the Bay Area. So I like to just have this slide running to really ground this wonky talk that we do in what we're talking about is creating a healthier community for the people that make the Bay Area home. But a deed-restricted affordable home is one that's legally required to remain affordable to people at certain income levels, often for decades or permanently sometimes. It's what makes this different kind of housing, a different housing that might be affordable for a moment, but then changes as rent rises, as a neighborhood changes, as markets change, making things more expensive. And in a region like the Bay Area, that distinction really matters. Housing scarcity and the cost of construction in the Bay Area are driving unaffordability. And that is pushing people farther away from the communities where they work, where they study, where they worship, where they receive care, from the families, from the places they grew up. We know that lower income households, renters, people, seniors, people with disabilities, people of color, and LGBTQIA+ people are more likely to face severe housing cost burdens and displacement pressures. And so this makes it extra important. Deed restricted affordable housing helps respond in a super concrete way. It helps create these homes that the market is not going to produce on its own. And protects those homes for the people that need them most. And those affordability requirements are then recorded on a property deed as a condition of receipt of some kind of public financing that makes it financially possible to build these homes with affordable rents and to protect them. Those deed restrictions are generally 55 years, and on average, one housing unit with that deed restriction will serve 20 people over that period of time. And so that really adds up for creating a stronger and more livable community. It doesn't happen by accident. It's created by a very specific set of public tools: low-income housing tax credits, local housing trust funds, state housing programs, federal rental assistance, land donations, density bonuses, fee waivers, public land, and other financing sources, sometimes all of those in one project. And oftentimes affordable housing is so hard to finance that it will take 8 to 10 financing sources. So this is, it's really critical. And these funding streams can also provide specific tools that create housing at income that are income protected for certain populations, like seniors, like farm workers, or families with young children. That financing structure is really important because it means the public has leverage. It means when we use public dollars, tax credits, land use incentives to create these homes, we get to ask certain questions. We get to say, who is this going to serve? How long will it remain affordable? Is it near transit? Is it near schools, parks, jobs, grocery stores, healthcare? Is it expanding access to neighborhoods where lower income families have historically had fewer choices? What are the mix of unit sizes? Are there enough for families with children? California uses an opportunity map to help guide affordable housing policy and funding that is developed to inform policy and giving priorities or lending priorities to make sure that we are in fact making progress about changing patterns of segregation that endure in housing and also then in schools. And as you know, lots of schools are struggling right now and closing, and this is also really a housing problem, not just a schools problem. But the purpose is really straightforward, that to direct this affordable housing in investment in ways that expand access to opportunity. So in practice, affordable housing finance can be designed to reward project in high resource areas, places with better access to things like strong schools, jobs, transit, cleaner environments, economic opportunity. And that is super technical, but has real world impact. This is the unique role that deed restricted affordable housing plays in AFFH. It turns housing from a principle, or fair housing from a principle, into a real place. And I'll wrap it up there. And now I think I get to turn it over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Jen. So now I get to tie together AFFH with meeting housing affordability needs. So you can click just once, Joey, back. So before I get into it, I can't actually see everyone because we're on a webinar, but I just want to get an abstract sense. So raise your hand if you're on the other side of that Zoom. Who here knows what a housing element is? I assume most people who are in this event know what a housing element is, but I bet a bunch of you don't. All right, you can put your hands down. Who here has read a housing element? Okay, I'm seeing some hands up, but it's not quite as many hands, even though, again, this is a really sharp group. So the big picture here is housing elements are these planning documents. They can run hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 pages. The housing element in Menlo Park, which I'm going to be talking about later, is longer than the book War and Peace. It is that extensive. But underneath all of this legal jargon, all of this technical analysis and documentation, housing elements are a story. Cities collect analysis about the housing needs in their community, about fair housing issues, about the constraints to meeting those needs. And it's a lot of data, but it's also a lot of information that helps explain the history and the policies that underlie that history about the housing outcomes we have seen. Housing elements are then a vision. Cities choose specific sites where they believe that they can meet those housing needs in the future. And then lastly, and most importantly, housing elements are a plan that ties all of that information together, where cities look at the constraints and the needs that they have, and they create a plan of concrete actions that they are going to take in order to make development possible on the sites that they have envisioned it happening. So I'm trying to make this abstract process more concrete. Next slide. Housing elements present a really cool opportunity, and Joey, you can click. They're updated every 8 years. This is a process that recurs because cities and counties' housing needs evolve over time. And so the planning process doesn't just stop. Cities never have successfully met all their housing needs, and now they get to call it quits and stop protecting tenants or promoting more housing opportunities. They need to continue planning. And then there are rules. Cities have to meet goals. I'm going to get to that on the next page. And there is enforcement. The California State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, oversees the way that cities plan for housing to make sure that they're actually doing something rather than nothing. You can click again, Joey. This process creates leverage. Cities are obligated to talk to their communities. They have to meet some criteria for choosing real sites. You can't just plan for building housing in a golf course or on City Hall or other buildings or like a public park that are never going to be housing. It's a little bit squishy, but there are at least some boundaries. And at least aspirationally, the programs, the actions that cities commit to need to have deadlines and actual deliverables. They don't always, but at least some of them do. You can go to the next slide, actually. All of this is backstopped by numbers. I don't want to get too into it, but every city has a housing goal. This is the housing goal by county. So I know we have a countywide, a multi-county panel here. So I included the numbers from every county, but each of these countywide numbers gets designated to each city, and cities need to demonstrate that they can actually meet the needs of housing. One last slide. You can go to the next slide, Joey, about housing elements. This process that we're currently in typically starts. We're in the 2023 to 2031 cycle, but the planning has to happen before the cycle starts. So many cities started planning in 2021, some of them 2022 if they were a little bit behind. And that begins with community outreach, all those assessments I talked about, telling the story, including AFFH, which we're going to talk about, and then the sites and the policies and programs. You can click 3 times, Joey. Um, Once cities do that planning, we enter the actual housing element cycle where cities are supposed to follow the plans. They've made a list of actions they're going to take. They then need to actually implement those actions with ordinances, with new policies and funding, with tenant protections. And it's up to advocates like us and hopefully everyone in this room and the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, to ensure that cities really follow through on those plans. So I want to tie this back to AFFH. Joey, you can go to the next slide. AFFH is new to the housing element process, relatively. The 2018 AFFH law embedded a new set of standards into the housing element. Pre 2018, housing elements were mostly focused on sites and showing that cities could produce housing in the locations that they were planning for housing and meet levels of affordability. AFFH is a whole new dimension of planning and housing policy that goes far beyond specific sites. It's supposed to be grounded in public input, embedded not just in the AFFH section, but in every part of the document to ensure that the sites aren't just concentrated in one neighborhood, but also to ensure that cities are thinking about more than just the sites and they're addressing the other needs that tenants have. It's supposed to be comprehensive. So it's not just production, it's preservation, it's protection. It includes beyond the 3 Ps, community investment, which Allison and some of the other panelists will talk about. And then, like everything, it's supposed to be concrete. Joey, you can go to the next slide. Aspirationally, in its ideal form, AFFH is a microcosm of every other part of the housing element. It starts with this outreach and then an assessment of fair housing, which includes data like historic segregation or historic racist policies, but also existing disparities in housing access, in rent burden, in racial inequality that has arisen. And then cities are supposed to try and analyze why these disparities have arisen, what the contributing factors are, especially the local ones that they can control, and then identify actions specifically focused on addressing those policies. And I'll emphasize again, the concrete actions, the actual commitments to do something, are the real outcome of this entire process. Sometimes cities will get a little bit sidetracked on sites or other things. You can go to the next slide, Joey. Um, in practice, this is a pretty messy process. Cities, especially this last cycle, because it was all new, normally did AFFH analysis late. They'd already written a lot of their housing element, and then they did the AFFH. Um, Sometimes the programs are not really targeted on disparities or investing in communities that need it. And it was especially controversial to try and take on the most exclusionary neighborhoods and really create opportunities there. But even with these challenges that AFFH has faced and these barriers, there are some really significant policy wins in a number of areas that we're going to be talking about today. Before we get there, I want Allison to talk about big picture what some of that looks like. So back to you, Allison.
Thanks so much. I just want to run us through some specifics that the California's Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing law requires. So it requires jurisdictions to address disparities in housing needs between protected classes. Who has a harder time at finding housing? Who has an easier time and may not need as much help? And how can responses be tailored to that? They need to address access to disparities in access to opportunity. So are there people with some types of characteristics that have an easier time getting to opportunity and others that do that have a harder time because of structural discrimination? Cities are required to replace segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns. So a lot of this really comes down to choice. People should be able to choose where they live and choose the neighborhoods and communities that work best for them and their families. Their choices should not be limited by structural discrimination. The third piece here is transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. So this is a piece that I think about as investment. And it's a piece that unfortunately has not gotten quite as much attention so far in our conversation about fair housing. So we'll share a case study with you about this shortly. It recognizes that the reason there are racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty is because of government policies that have created these neighborhoods that are really kind of fighting an uphill battle, that have lacked investment. And then finally, fostering and maintaining compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. And this is kind of what we think about as kind of the classic fair housing. So with that, next slide. We're going to get into some local case studies and see examples from around the Bay from our housing elements of how AFFH is put into practice, how these four kind of different pillars of AFFH are expressed in some of our local housing elements. So with that, I'll pass it to Joey.
Thanks for the patience, all. It was taking me a while to find that unmute button, but I'm really excited to share our first case study, and I'm going to share about AFFH's work in the city of Concord over the past several years, where we've been doing work explicitly around affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I'll start by saying that for our work in Concord, we really have to thank and lift up the work that we did with community partnerships, and specifically a coalition called Raise the Roof that AFFH is a part of. That last picture on the last slide was a picture of some AFFH members as well as other members of Raise the Roof, which is a coalition that was formed in the late 20-teens, I don't remember the exact year, around a framework of roof and refuge. So it was looking at the interwoven fronts of immigrant and tenant rights. It includes, the coalition includes tenant unions, it includes labor unions, It includes service providers, nonprofit developers, and people coming to housing justice and immigrant justice from a lot of different angles. But before AB 686 was passed and before the most recent housing element cycle, Raise the Roof had already been interested in fair housing and housing justice in the city of Concord. And AB 686 and the sixth cycle housing element update provided some key tools for us to be able to advance some campaigns that folks had already been working on for a long time. And now we had these new tools to advance those goals. So in 2023, or in the years leading up to 2023, the coalition identified that if we could get the city of Concord to commit to certain things in the housing element, we would have much greater leverage to achieve those goals, those fair housing goals that we had already been fighting for a long time. And the two real commitments that came out of that housing element were a commitment to develop a rent stabilization ordinance in the city of Concord, which would help prevent displacement, prevent evictions, and the population that is most impacted by evictions and displacement in the city of Concord is the Black and Latinx population in Concord. And so that was, a fair housing goal that we had, was to get that rent stabilization ordinance that folks had been organizing for quite some time before the housing element update. And then the other commitment that the city made in its housing element was to rezone, to break up areas that had historically only allowed for single family housing and had therefore been exclusive to people with lower incomes, to rezone to allow for more multifamily housing in those areas, which were not only exclusive, but also typically higher resourced and rich in opportunities, rich in things like schools and parks that benefited only the people who could afford to live in those neighborhoods. So I'll say, we did all of this work in coalition. I'm going to focus on the rezoning aspect of it because that's the element that AFFH was leading out on in our coalition work. Some other coalition members really led the charge on the rent stabilization campaign that has taken place over the past couple of years. But I don't want to downplay that is also a really important campaign that took place. And so happy to talk more about it in the Q&A or to follow up another time. And I'll say one other thing that we didn't see in this housing element cycle was what Allison named about investing in areas that are currently under-resourced or have not seen investment over the years. So the city of Concord agreed these areas that we have invested in, that are rich in opportunity, we're going to try to open those up. But the city did not say we're going to invest in the areas that don't have the parks, that don't have the schools. So that's another element of fair housing that we'll have to address moving forward. So this map I like to use to demonstrate why rezoning was so critical in Concord. This is a map that shows all of the places where you can find deed restricted affordable housing in Concord. And you can see it's a big city. Most of the affordable housing is located in this area in downtown and a neighborhood called the Monument Corridor. There are a couple more developments, 3 buildings in this area of southeast Concord. They're all right along Clayton Road, along this major thoroughfare. But as you get into the neighborhoods of southeast and I guess northeast Concord and northern Concord up here, you're not going to find any affordable housing. And the reason you won't find any affordable housing, any deed restricted affordable housing, is that for the most part, these neighborhoods are zoned only to allow for single family housing. And this is a historical tool that cities have used to create de facto segregation, even after redlining and racially restrictive covenants were outlawed. Cities were able to create neighborhoods that were you're only allowed to build single family homes. And because single family homes are often so cost prohibitive, you end up with racially and economically segregated neighborhoods. So Concord committed in its housing element to rezone some sites within these exclusive neighborhoods to allow for multifamily housing. They committed to rezoning at least 20 acres at a density that would allow for at least 1,000 new homes. Now, I want to flag that this is different from programs we often see where cities will rezone an entire neighborhood, or they'll rezone a corridor along a major street. Concord was very specific, and because there was a lot of pushback against this rezoning, and they whittled down the program and the commitment considerably. They said, we'll just rezone specific sites within these neighborhoods. And so, we viewed this as a win. We got some of this rezoning that we were looking for, but also a win that came with significant limitations, because it was not a city, it was not a commitment that looked to reshape an entire neighborhood or an entire area. It was a win that was going to be limited to specific sites. Also, notably, the commitment was not that that those sites could be limited to deed-restricted affordable housing. The hope was that by opening up for multifamily housing, we would get some deed-restricted affordable housing, and we would get housing that is more affordable than single-family homes. But we know that there's a lot of work that would still need to happen to make sure that any housing that's built in these new neighborhoods actually is affordable and accessible to new community members. So I see a picture isn't loading, but that's okay. What the city of Concord did to determine which specific sites they were going to use, first they identified an area, and it's outlined in this map. It's kind of a confusing map of the city of Concord that we can see over here. But this blue outline shows the full area that the city was open to finding sites to rezone for multifamily housing. And then these patches of blue in here show areas that the state has designated as either high opportunity areas. Again, that's based on things like access to schools, access to grocery stores, access to parks and clean air. So there are some areas that are designated that way, and there are other areas that are designated as racially concentrated areas of affluence. And that means that looking at the census data, we know that in these neighborhoods, we have racially concentrated groups, usually concentrations of white folks, and areas of affluence with high incomes, high average incomes. And so the city said, let's look in this area where high opportunity overlaps with racially concentrated areas and select a certain number of sites within that area to rezone to allow for multifamily housing. And like I said, the city faced a lot of pushback, even at the idea of rezoning, a pretty limited selection of sites. And the city really, in response to that pushback from community members who said, I do not want multifamily housing in my neighborhood, dragged this process of site selection out. There was a lot of fear that there would be major backlash if the wrong sites were chosen that upset the wrong neighbors. So we ended up with 13 meetings, community meetings, whether those were city council meetings, planning commission meetings, to gather input on this rezoning program, and it took place over the course of 3 years. Now, normally you will never hear anyone from AFFH talking down on community input meetings, because it is valuable that the community guides the process of planning and determining what kind of housing we have in our neighborhoods. But notably, these community input meetings were largely focused on the community members who already lived in the neighborhoods where rezoning needed to happen, and not the community members who had so far been excluded from those neighborhoods. So part of our work as advocates was to make sure that we opened up the doors and facilitated some alternative community input meetings that brought in the voices of people who were looking to possibly move into these neighborhoods and say, well, what sites would look best for you? And eventually we ended up finishing this rezoning process this year. We saw the city of Concord rezone a total of 5 sites and meet its commitment. Like I said, it was a very drawn out process, and we can talk more later about some of the challenges, but I would say overall, we're really happy that the city followed through on this commitment and know that there's a lot of work to do in actually shifting the attitudes of the community towards affordable housing, which really came up as a barrier to this process being more comprehensive or more effective. And with that, I'll pass it to Jen for our next case study.
Thanks, Joey. I really appreciate you talking about community engagement, polling the folks who already are safely, stably, affordably housed, likely, and not the folks that affordable housing often serves, because I think that that is really what happens. And it's a really interesting thing. We do community engagement to decide that we need housing. And then we do this second round of community engagement to see, like, what do people think about our housing solutions, which is completely different from how we usually work, where areas of expertise matter. Like, the world said we need to go to the moon, and then they didn't say, would you like to come to a committee to talk about jet propulsion? They were like, we're going to let the experts handle that. Or the world says we need to have more water access. Then you didn't have a community meeting to decide where they're going to trench in the neighborhood. They're going to let the experts handle that. But it's like that second round of community input that sometimes is actually not helpful, because it's already hearing just from sort of the haves instead of what often are the have-nots, and what fair housing is really targeting. But Healdsburg, if you haven't been there, is a bougie little affluent community in northern Sonoma County. It's beautiful. And we also have a large agriculture and hospitality and tourist-based economy. That means that there are 6 low-wage jobs to every affordable housing unit. Only about 16% of the workforce, the folks that pour your wine there and serve you food and teach the kids there, can afford to live in Healdsburg. There is a overall lack of deed restricted affordable housing and lower middle and middle income workforce housing. The city itself has identified that the barriers to producing the housing we need are a growth management ordinance that actually sets a cap on how many units can be produced in different income levels every year. That's been in place for a couple of decades, as well as zoning and density restrictions that are common lots of places. Most of Healdsburg is reserved for single family homes only. And so a couple years ago, the city put on the ballot Measure O, an amendment to the GMO, which would increase the number of units. It wouldn't get rid of it, but it would have increased the number of units that could be built every year under it. And this was soundly defeated in June, and that says June, but it should say November, actually. That's a major typo, November to June. But in 2024, that was defeated by the public, and really in a fear-based campaign that was about, our property values are gonna go down, and even though we know research shows that that's not true, affordable housing doesn't cause adjacent property values to go down. And we are going to have greater crime rates, and that's also not true. The research bears that out as false, and also that we would start infringing on our open spaces. And we have very significant open space protections in Sonoma County that this would not have changed. But the campaign against it means that it was defeated. Now, importantly, these 2 barriers, the GMO, and there is a state solution that kind of is an end run around the GMO and the zoning and density restrictions. And that is this law that has yet to be used in California, because it's an opt-in law called SB 10. And SB 10 was passed in 2022. And and if you can go to the next slide, I think there's an SB 10 slide. And it was passed in 2022, but again, it's an opt-in, it's optional. And if a community adopts it through City Council, Planning Commission, and the City Council in creating an ordinance, then it upzones up to 10 units multifamily, plus, if you're super creative, and a detached ADU and JDU on that parcel in all transit-oriented places within a 10-minute walk of a major transit stop, which doesn't exist in Healdsburg, by the way. But what does exist in Healdsburg are infill areas, empty or underused lots within existing neighborhoods. It would upzone a tremendous number of parcels in Healdsburg and allow someone to either take a vacant lot, an underused lot, a house that's ready for a tear down, an old house, to turn that into a 10-unit, or something that could be built as affordable housing, could be built as affordable by design, kind of lower middle income housing. And if you adopt it with a majority of your city council or super majority of your city council, then it is also CEQA exempt. So not just the ordinance, but every parcel within it, their project is gets a CEQA exemption. So the city identified, here's how we tackle our housing our crisis. We need to deal with the GMO and we need to upzone. And here's SB 10, which is this perfect tool. But it hasn't been used in California yet. It's actually been used on a couple parcels, but it hasn't been used really at a community-wide level. And primarily because it was tried in a couple cities and they immediately got NIMBY backlash about this. And they were terrified that everything was going to be redeveloped. Which is very unlikely to be true. But it does provide another tool and one that can operate sort of in parallel to larger developments that are developed by traditional nonprofit affordable housing developers. We've been advocating for this throughout Sonoma County. We think that the county itself and unincorporated Sonoma County will adopt it. We think that Santa Rosa, our largest city, is on track to adopt it. We think there's some interest in a couple places in Napa, but Healdsburg we really targeted because we thought it's specifically responsive to what they saw as their problem. And so far, though, there has been not the enthusiasm by the council that we would have liked to have seen. And interestingly, a lot of this language has been around the desire to, and this is a quote, protect single-family neighborhoods. And so what I'm calling this is systemic NIMBYism. And it's sort of like anticipatory NIMBYism. I am afraid that these people who yelled at us during the Measure O campaign are going to come yell at us again. And my answer always is, you are absolutely right. They are going to. And then they get to yell once, and then after that, they don't get to yell anymore. But you could probably name the people who are going to yell at you. You probably already know them, then they're neighbors, and that's why we're afraid of them. But so we're not going to stop on this one. We think that this is a really powerful tool, and also encourage other communities where this fits. And we do think it fits really well in these smaller communities. And I'll leave with one last thing, is that in Sonoma County and in Napa County and Marin County, and I suspect everywhere through the Bay Area, areas that I'm less familiar with, there are older, highly prized neighborhoods and that people love, and that have mansions next to triplexes and a little courtyard apartment building down the street, and that they all exist in this like multi-typology way, all because it was built before 1940. I live in a neighborhood like that, and I still get flyers on my door that says, can we please come by your home, because they are highly prized neighborhoods. This is allowing people to build the way we used to build, that created the neighborhoods that we really love so much, that are really have a diversity of housing typology. So I like to call it building like our grandparents did, or probably our great grandparents, and hope that this can be a tool that we actually use someday. And I'm passing it back to Jeremy.
Thanks, Jen. So what I'm talking about is a really fun program to build affordable housing in a part of Menlo Park that has never had affordable housing before, on 3 city-owned parking lots. Joey, you can go to the next slide. To understand why this is so significant for AFFH, it's important to understand a little bit of history and context in Menlo Park. So this is one of those cool opportunity maps that Jen referenced in an earlier part of her presentation when she was talking about where affordable housing gets built. It tries to estimate where there's access to good schools, access to good jobs, good environmental quality, and other features that mean that someone who grows up there is going to have access to good resources. In Menlo Park, there is a disparity. The west side of the community, separated by 101 most significantly, but also by El Camino Real, is really high opportunity. Good jobs, and this is actually an outdated opportunity map. The west side has been upgraded in the opportunity level recently to be the highest level. East of 101 is lower resource. Joey, can you give me 2 clicks? By coincidence, this is sort of a hard to read dot map, but if you look in the upper right-hand corner, what you will see is that the eastern portion of Menlo Park is much more predominantly Hispanic and Black than the western portion of the community. Highway 101 was actually built intentionally on that route to segregate the Bellhaven neighborhood, which is the neighborhood east of 101, from the rest of Menlo Park and from the resources available. Thanks for waving your mouse over there, Joey. So that's the history we're dealing with. Joey, can you give me 8 clicks? Um, can you guys tell that I really like transitions? Um, so those orange dots that you're seeing are where Menlo Park has planned for new housing in the last housing element cycle. That was 2015 to 2023. All of the new housing was concentrated in Bellhaven. And new housing can bring many benefits. Having affordable housing in the places where there are more lower income households can bring investment to those communities. But concentrating all of the affordable housing in one neighborhood meant that Menlo Park wasn't creating any opportunities in the rest of the community for people to live. So, Joey, you can hit me on the next slide. Uh, Menlo Park in this housing element cycle had to come up with something different. And it's a little hard to see because the map is sort of tiny, but on this map, all of the sites that Menlo Park planned for housing in this most recent cycle are outside of Bellhaven. Because AFFH forced the city to have to plan for housing throughout the community, not just in one neighborhood. And what I'm going to talk about today is maybe the most significant program that Menlo Park has in order to promote opportunity and access in its wealthier neighborhoods. Hit me with a click, Joey. A plan to build affordable housing on city-owned parking lots in its downtown. Those little brown dots within that blue square are city-owned parking lots. Hit me with another click. And the city has moved forward with plans to build housing on 3 of those parking lots. Go to the next slide. Um, so I want to just really nerd out for a minute on what a program can look like. This is a block of language. I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'm going to draw your attention to how the housing element translates into a real plan by creating an action that actually matters. So click Joey 3 times, I think. What really makes this noticeable is the housing element has really clear language. It says that the city will issue a request for proposals, complete entitlements, and it most importantly has a number of units that it says it will strive to produce at least 345 affordable homes. Joey, you can click again. I just want to emphasize that. Like, that number is so important because it backstops everything else that the city might talk about. And as you can see on the bottom, an important part of this was not just saying the city was going to do a thing, but putting deadlines on that thing. It's not that Menlo Park is actually meeting all of these deadlines to a T, but the fact that it has faced some opposition and moved a little slower means that there's a lot of leverage to push them to catch up and move quickly. And this program has been really important because, as you might see on the next slide, Menlo Park has had a lot of opposition. This is a graphic from a group called Save Downtown Menlo Park, where they're fear-mongering about how devastating the housing's going to be to the downtown area. Now, I, for one, actually think it would be pretty sweet if Menlo Park had buildings that looked like that in its downtown. Those look perfectly cool to me. But the city has faced really well-organized and well-funded opposition to building housing on these parking lots. But because of the housing element, it has not stopped. What Jen was talking about, where cities hear a little bit of opposition and waffle, hasn't slowed Menlo Park down. They have continued to release the request for proposals. Just last week, they hosted an open house with 3 of the proposals to initiate the process of entitlement. And that what it really shows is how the housing element not just helps overcome disparities in how cities plan, but prevents them from backing off when they face the first signs of opposition, even when it's well organized. It's also, as you go to the next slide, it's a really cool opportunity. We have a local partner called Menlo Together, which has been organizing in support for these parking lots and has gained a ton of new members because there are people in the community who do want housing outside of Bellhaven, who believe that there should be opportunity in Menlo Park. So That's just an example of how AFFH can help lead to really cool policy and help build really good community organizing opportunities that bring people together. Allison, I think you're next.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. I'll be relatively brief here. So I want to talk a little bit about North Sunnyvale's equitable investment. This is going to be a little bit of an odd one in this program because it is not about housing. So Jeremy mentioned that it's important to build affordable housing in lower income neighborhoods because it helps strengthen and stabilize those neighborhoods. It provides great opportunities for people that want to remain there in their neighborhoods. But we also recognize that we need to invest having created areas that are low in resources. One of the requirements of AFFH is transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. So I will note here on this map, that light green portion is Sunnyvale's lowest resource area, according to state maps. It does not qualify by state standards as a racially and ethnically concentrated area of poverty, but the state has been very clear that it expects you to work with what you have. And if you don't have something that technically meets those thresholds, your goal as a local jurisdiction is to lift up the lower resource areas that you have there. So Sunnyvale has a program that prioritizes its Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. For people who are real governance nerds here, you may know that this is one of the largest areas of discretionary spending that local jurisdictions have. It's used to invest in kind of long-term infrastructure needs for the community. It's not generally used for housing, but it's used for, here, why don't I go ahead? I'm gonna read you what this program says in Sunnyvale and how they're working to address and prioritize the CIP to address the area. So as part of the annual CIP development process, prioritize funding for neighborhood improvements, including pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, safety improvements, transit amenities, parks, trails, streetscape, and other community amenities in low and moderate resource areas of northern Sunnyvale. So you can see these are the kinds of things that make areas safe to live in, that make that give resources for communities to be able to thrive and be healthy all the way around. Next slide, please. So three of the major projects here are the Lakewood Branch Library, a park renovation, and pedestrian and bike improvements. So the Lakewood neighborhood in North Sunnyvale has the lowest percentage of residents with Sunnyvale library cards of any neighborhood in Sunnyvale. Some of the city's residents with the most to gain from library services have the most difficult time accessing those services. So this project is going to bring the library services closer to these residents. So the Lakewood Branch Library and Learning Center project funds construction of about 20,000 square feet of a branch library facility in the Lakewood Village neighborhood. It's a partnership between the city of Sunnyvale, Sunnyvale School District, and Fremont Union High School District. So again, I just want to lift up that the city of Sunnyvale has taken a really creative approach here. This is in the housing element, but it goes way beyond the kinds of resources that we think of housing departments having, and looks across the full spectrum of resources that are available to the city and community partners, and finds ways to stitch these together to provide what this neighborhood. The center is going to serve as a primary resource for literacy, learning, and wellness activities for residents of North Sunnyvale. It's expected to open sometime this summer if it's on track. Then to the right there, you'll see the Lakewood Park renovation. This is a 60-year-old park getting its first major renovation since it was built. So construction on this started in April. It's beginning with the new all-inclusive playground, and that's using grant funding from Santa Clara County's all-inclusive playground grant program. It's expected to open late this summer. There's also bicycle and pedestrian improvements for the Safe Routes to School project. So over the next year, this is also going to include in the park, in this area, a dog park, a water play area, a mini skate park, lighting, landscaping, irrigation, set to be complete in 2027. So Again, as Jeremy noted, there are firm timelines there. The housing element program is explicit about where the sources of funding are coming from, how this is going to proceed, how it's going to benefit residents. Safe routes to schools improvements. So what you see here in the pedestrian and bike improvements in the bottom left corner of the slide are improvements at Columbia Middle School and San Miguel Elementary School. There are crosswalk improvements there. You can see there's kind of a raised speed table that will either slow you way down or make your car lift up off the ground if you don't notice it in time. But there's high visibility crosswalks, curb ramps, curb extensions, things to make it safer for the residents in these neighborhoods to be able to cross the street, to get to the places where they need to go, like schools and other communities. There's also bicycle network improvements on 4 different avenues at North Sunny. So this is a great example, in addition to housing, of creative ways that cities can approach the full range of resources to transform communities that are in need of this investment, so that eventually all of our neighborhoods are high resource, because that is what we need for people to be able to thrive. So with that, I am going to pass it on. Who are we back to? I'm going to pass it on to Elaine.
Thank you. It's good to be here this afternoon. We're going to focus on affirmative fair housing and Measure C. Just a brief history on Housing Santa Cruz County and how we came about and how it's attached to Measure H, which then turned into Measure C. So back in 2016, there was about 60 community leaders that got together and was talking about how we could get a countywide sales tax on the ballot, because we were seeing the suffering of our community members not being able to get housed, stay housed. And so we ran, in 2018, we ran a countywide housing bond, and it failed. And it failed really, not by too much, but in that failure is how Santa Cruz County actually was formed, because we knew that we had to do something in order to be able to help our community members in staying housed and getting housed. Next slide, please. Fast forward to 2023. Housing Santa Cruz County launched in 2020 and 2023. Those same 60 plus community members and community leaders came together and said, okay, now we're the most expensive place to live in the nation. We need to do something different. That we got to change this, because our community was really struggling. And so the seed was planted to do just a city of Santa Cruz tax, because we already knew if we tried to do a countywide tax that it was going to fail. And we didn't want to go down that road again. And so you'll see here, we spent 2.5 years in the process. And the reason why it took that long, because it was absolutely critical that we made sure that we got this right. And getting this right meant making sure our community members that were impacted by housing, food insecurity was at the table to be a part of the decisions. And so, when you have 60-something people at the table, you're not going to get things done overnight. But it took us 2.5 years, and I was pleased that it took us that long, because I knew that once we had lived experience at the table, that we had a chance of succeeding, which we did, as you can see there. The measure passed by 56.4%, when the odds was actually against us. Our polling showed that 43%, but our community showed up and showed out and passed this measure, because it's not so much about the number as it is the community saying, hey, yes, I want to help my neighbors who are struggling to continue to live in their homes and end up unhoused. And so we had great success there. The revenue that was restricted for the measure, we, as I mentioned, we spent quite a bit of time ironing that out, because we wanted to make sure that a large percentage of that money was going to go for actual affordable housing projects, and projects that were going to be affordable for everyone's pocketbooks and not just for some. And so we also made sure that we focused on our unhoused community to make sure they had easy access to rental assistance and other different services. Next slide, please. There you see our group of supporters who showed up every single Saturday for our campaign for our great success. One of the things that we had talked about and addressed was that we couldn't just sit on the sidelines and not do anything. When the seed was planted to move forward with Measure C, we knew that we had to do something. We knew that if we couldn't wait for the state or the federal to decide if we were going to get funding to make sure our community stay housed. And so we were like, okay, we're going to get off the sidelines. We're going to jump right in, and we're going to do what we can to make this win. And that's what we did. And we were successful. Next slide, please. One of the things that's really important that I want to share about the work we did with Measure C was the support that we had from our city and our county employees and colleagues. We couldn't do this work by ourselves, and a lot of our community members who are impacted by, the lack of housing or struggling to make ends meet, one paycheck away from not being able to pay the rent. We had to have the collaboration of our city and county employees, right? Because if you don't have the job, then you can't pay the bills. And so, we spent, and still to this day, we work really, really closely with our county employees to make sure that, especially our Black and Brown community, have access to employment. We spent the whole year, and I was part of the collaboration and the committee to make sure those with lived experience were part of committees because they weren't on commissions because they weren't on the local commissions. We approved a stipend for every commission meeting that people would join. That started about 1.5 years ago. So this opened up the space for access for people who couldn't actually join commissions because they couldn't afford to because of having childcare issues and stuff. And so we made sure that the playing field was level and that everyone had access to it. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, Santa Cruz County, South County is predominantly Caucasian. South County is predominantly Latinx. North County is predominantly Caucasian. And there has been a lot of talks, for the last several years about the redlining issues, farm workers having to struggle living 15 to a 2-bedroom house, and the zoning laws that were put in place so that Black and Brown people couldn't move into those neighborhoods. Well, HSCC and a lot of our other community board organizations continue to work with, again, our city and county employees and our elected officials to get these locations rezoned. I was actually on a call this morning about another area in the city of Santa Cruz that we are advocating for to get it rezoned. Because these were done intentionally to keep certain people out, and this is 2026. It is time to change those policies. Next slide, please. And why this still matters? I think of something Dr. Cushel said when she was here a couple of years ago. Housing is health, and health is housing. Without housing, people won't be able to function. They won't be able to go to work. They're missing work. I mean, we hear this stuff all the time. And, with everyone, struggling to make ends meet as things continue to rise, we need to continue to make sure we can do whatever we can to bring additional funding into our community so that our community members, especially those that are really, truly struggling, can have access to funding. And the Measure C funding will allow that to happen. Next slide, please. I was recently selected to be on the oversight committee for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, where the Measure C funding will be going into. And funding will start going into that trust fund actually next month. I'm really excited about that because our community members will now have access, to make sure if they're, short on the rent, they'll be able to reach into the trust fund and ask for rent assistance. It'll help support, different housing projects that may get stuck. It will help with food insecurity. It will help people that are unhoused get housed and get additional services. And so, in meeting, these additional goals, that the success of Measure C is going to have a huge impact in our city. And one of our goals now that Measure C has passed in the city of Santa Cruz, we're going to be having the conversation in South County as well. Next slide, please. You know, I have to read. If we are serious about affirmative further fair housing, we must move beyond statements of intent and invest in the infrastructure of equity. And I couldn't agree with that more. The group of people in this picture, we have assembly members, we have city council members, we have supervisors in this picture here that will a big part of Measure C that said, yes, we will do whatever we can to make sure that our community gets and stays healthy. And so I'm incredibly grateful for Assemblymember Pellin, who's also a personal friend, who has been a big champion for helping us to get housing in Santa Cruz County. Next slide, please. You know, I partner with the Housing for Health Department in Santa Cruz County, Dr. Robert Ratner. And that department was put together back about 5 years ago, and we have been working really closely on the connection between the housing, health, and education. And looking forward, we're going to be working really closely with our developers and making sure that any housing projects that get stuck, we're going to make sure they get moving forward. We're going to make sure that the housing that is being built in Santa Cruz County is really being built for everyone's pocketbooks, because that's been a struggle here. A lot of people still can't meet the rents of the housing that's being built currently. And so we are making sure we can do everything we can to make sure that that everyone has access to the new homes that are going to be built. And, you know, as I put on my NAACP hat for a moment, I am the president of our local branch. We spend a lot of time making sure that our Black and Brown communities, our communities that are struggling, are given a fair shot. We do give it a lot of calls about, you know, tenant concerns and landlord concerns. And so we make sure that we stay on top of that to make sure that everyone that is treated fairly with dignity and respect wherever they lay their head at night. Next slide. So as we continue to celebrate, you know, the Measure C win, you know, it doesn't stop there, as we all know. It's going to bring in about $5 million a year for the next 20 years, which is a lot of money. And some people say it's not a lot of money. I say it's more money than what we had, and it is going to save a lot of lives and change a lot of lives. And so, you know, we continue to celebrate that, and we continue to think of ways of how we can also look at our other local jurisdictions and bring in additional funding into our community, because we can't sit on the sidelines waiting for the state or the federal government to figure out if they're going to be able to support our housing needs. And last slide. So the question before us is not whether inequities exist, because we actually know they do. The question is whether we are willing to align our policies, investments, and values to create a more inclusive future. Measure C helps provide the tools for an inclusive future. Thank you so much. Now we'll go into the questions. I'll go take a look here, and let's see what we have. Well, our first question, will slides and recordings be available? Allison, you want to address that?
Sure, we're going to share recordings in both Spanish and English and the slides with everyone who registered for the program today.
Thank you, Allison. Next question, can you cite some enforcement examples for cities who consistently fall short of their RHNA goals? Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm happy to at least start this one. The housing element process is largely planning oriented, not outcomes oriented. So there are several hundred cities around the state that are subject to SB 35 and SB 423, which are rules that say when cities aren't meeting their RHNA goals, they have to approve housing in a streamlined process. But that is really the only penalty for not actually meeting the goals. On the planning side, though, many cities have faced penalties for failing to plan sufficiently. Those penalties, the most significant one has been the builder's remedy. Cities that do not meet the timeline for the housing element planning process lose control of local zoning. And that has led to many projects that are larger than what cities had planned for being proposed. That doesn't address AFFH as much as it simply throws the city planning process completely out the window. Um, so that's specifically about production at scale. Some cities have started to face lawsuits. There have been third-party lawsuits related to cities failing to implement their housing elements. Huntington Beach has been sued by the Attorney General most prominently, and for the first time, some cities are starting to receive more, I'd say, the initiation of stricter legal penalties in Half Moon Bay and in parts of Marin and elsewhere. So um, the enforcement is slow, but it's starting to occur. Good question.
Thank you. And I will move on to, I thought the single family home zoning was eliminated by the state recently under, or did that fail? Jen, you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine.
Mhm.
So SB 9, which was passed, and now I think it was, if someone wants to shout out the date, 2021 or 2022, did essentially eliminate single family zoning by allowing most single family zones to, or single family lots to be subdivided, split into, and then to build duplexes in those. However, there are a lot of restrictions on the homeowner's ability to do that. And it is often cost prohibitive to have people build in that way. And so it hasn't been a particularly effective tool. It's helped. It's a tool in the toolbox. We say great for all the tools in the toolbox, I think. But its ultimate impact is not going to be great. And it's a relatively modest upzone. So at best, it is turning one lot into 4 homes if you can take advantage of it in that way. So it's a modest improvement. We'll take it, but we need more.
Here is another one. Can you describe the relationship between affirmative furthering fair housing and advocating for policies that upzone for market rate housing instead of just upzoning for 100% affordable housing? Who would like to take that? Go ahead, Joey.
I can speak to that because that's pretty much what we saw in Concord, was that the AFFH rezoning program rezoned to allow multifamily housing, but it didn't include any guarantees of what kind of housing or how affordable that would be. And so, what we can say is that in general, multifamily housing is often more affordable than single family housing. And that certainly for the types of affordable housing that are most common today and the types of funding mechanisms that are available today, we are most likely to see deed restricted affordable housing built if multifamily housing is allowed in the first place. We're not likely to see developments of single family homes that are deed restricted as affordable housing. And so rezoning to allow for multifamily housing, whether or not it's deed restricted, is necessary. It's a necessary condition to be able to then create affordable housing, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough in and of itself. And so, we were always supportive of the rezoning to allow for the multifamily housing. And then we know that the next step is to advocate that housing be affordable. And then the only qualification I put on that is that this really depends on where you are in the region. Like the impacts of zoning, of upzoning, are going to be very different in areas that are highly affluent from areas where maybe there's a population, a low-income population that has been able to purchase single-family homes in a certain neighborhood, and then all of a sudden upzoning in that neighborhood actually could have a displacement effect. We were not as concerned, for instance, in Concord about a displacement effect in some of these wealthy neighborhoods of upzoning. But upzoning isn't always the appropriate tool if there aren't guardrails about affordability. There are some cases where you can be a little bit more aggressive than in other places where you really need to make sure you have certain guardrails in place before moving forward with an aggressive upzoning tactic. So I think that the main thing is just knowing your neighborhood.
Thank you. This is a Measure C question. What does the future of Measure C look like? As mentioned, so the Measure C tax measure had, we had a double tax there. We had a parcel tax and a real estate transfer tax. And so the parcel tax, anyone who owns a home in the city of Santa Cruz is going to be paying in $96 a year. And anyone who purchased a home over $1.8 million, there was a certain percentage that would be going into the Measure C fund. And some of those funds will start coming in starting in next month in June. What that looks like, once the money goes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, community members can apply to get rental assistance. Those of our community members that are unhoused can apply to get some funding to help them to get housed. Developers can apply to get funding to help them move a project that may be stuck. And that's something we see a lot of projects get halfway through, 3/4 through, and then they run out of funding. So they'll be able to get funding from there as well. And those are just some of the things that the money will be used for. I think in the interest of time, we'll answer one more question. Let's see. I heard that Woodside that tried to become a mountain lion sanctuary to get out of planning for housing. Was that related to housing elements?
I was related to SB 9, which was a rule that allows duplexes, at least in theory, in every single family neighborhood. It turns out actually since basically the Attorney General threatened to sue them into insolvency, they backed off of that, and Woodside now has more SB 9 applications than almost any other jurisdiction in the Bay Area.
Wow.
They have a lot of big lots in Woodside, so no surprise.
Okay, let's see. Let me see. Do you have thoughts on accessibility and visibility into the affordable housing application process and reform? Who'd like to take that one? Allison, want to take that one?
Sure. So, we're really excited that the California Department of Housing and Homelessness, the California Housing and Homelessness Agency, new state agency is being created to pull together a lot of different funding programs that have traditionally been kind of scattered across state agencies, and also create a cabinet level position that is really focused on housing at the state level. We are hoping and we are almost at time. I don't want to take too long. We're hoping that's going to make it a lot easier for developers of affordable housing to access funding and help these things move more quickly, because time is money, and hopefully that will also increase some. With that, I think we're going to pass it to Jen to wrap us up.
Thanks, Allison. I want to thank MTC ABAG for the grant that made this event possible, to this great group of presenters, our regional partners who work passionately together every day to tackle housing challenges with crisis level repercussions in our communities. Thank you for being here. I asked Joey to put this slide back on to remind us who we are trying to serve when we are working to increase affordable housing opportunities. It is people. Elaine said that her Measure C, and I'll extrapolate to affordable housing, generally is going to help and save lives, and this cannot be overstated. Housing is foundational to the health of our community members and our communities generally. There's tons of information that's been shared here, and some of you might use it really specifically in your jobs, sometimes not. It depends on what your kind of wonk level is and what your position is, but I'll leave you with this. You do not have to be a housing policy expert to help advance fair housing. You just need to know that affirmatively furthering fair housing is the law. It's a legal requirement, and then be bold enough to be an ally for those who need it and to speak up for people and projects that will serve them. Thank you for being here.
Is that our time?
That is our time. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great Affordable Housing Month. Make sure you check out the calendar and events in your area. Join. Let's get together in community, learn, and have a great time.
And we'll be sending out slides, recording, and maybe we can send out all of our contact information. So if anyone wants to reach out to any of us, we can all be in touch. Thanks all.